Video today. This is actually for the benefit of the Highlands Ranch Historical Society. But they're going to do, before we do anything else, do a quick sound check. So
it's like a concert, right?
No. So we're testing. You good? Okay, we're good. Okay, great. Well, first of all, we'll have our announcements from our class assistant.
Okay. I'm passing up on the things that have already happened. Now we get to the first thing is to remind everybody to silence your cell phones, please. Also, the noon show has been rescheduled from Wednesday, October the 30th to Tuesday, November the 5th. So bear that in mind on your calendar. This is your chance to hear about all the classes that are going to be in the winter session. So you want to come and kind of get a bird's eye view of what's going on next semester. And also next Tuesday, which was this next Tuesday, in this room here, I believe, is Barb Radcliffe, and she's going to do a presentation of our OLLI South and where we're going and where we've been and what plans they have for us. It's always an interesting presentation. I recommend that you listen to it. And that's all we have. Oh, we have member cards. Does everybody have a member card? Any new people who have not got their card yet? Okay, that's usually by this far into the week, most people have theirs. Okay, have a good day.
Also, today we're going to learn about Highlands Ranch, and we have two people here from the Highlands Ranch Historical Society. We have Nancy Linsenbigler, and Mark Stevenson back here, who's videotaping. This is really for the Highlands Ranch Historical Society's purposes, the video. So that's what they're doing for. So I will turn it over to Nancy.
Okay, let's start. Thank you all for having us. Yes. Good. All right. Thank you for having us. Before we get into our slide presentation and all that, how many of you live in Highlands Ranch? Okay, not too many. I expected more. How many of you have been to Highlands Ranch? There we go. What was your first impression? Anybody, what was your first impression when you first went there?
I was there when it was an antelope field.
Okay.
I loved it.
So a long time ago. You're really old, huh?
No, I've just been here a long time.
Anybody else? What was your first impression?
I went there for polo matches one time.
Oh, so with
A long time ago.
the Arapahoe Hunt Club? All right. Well, how about anybody who went there for the first time when there was houses there?
Oh my God, what have they done?
Yeah, it didn't look good at all, did it? No. Okay. Anybody else? Anybody agree with him? Just about everybody agree. And that was my first impression too. I'm a Denver native. Was born here, lived here for like my first 6, 7 years. Then we moved to California. So I lived in California most of my life, and then moved back in 2000. So I've been here almost 20 years now. My sister had already been here, and all the family was here, so I thought it was time to come. And I didn't even know about Highlands Ranch because they were all in Wheat Ridge and up in that area. And the first time when I actually was thinking maybe I would move back, I remember driving into Highlands Ranch. I was by myself. I just had a rental car and was tooling around, and I don't think I stayed in it all of 10 seconds. It was like, oh my gosh, this is awful. How could anyone stand this? And then, wouldn't you know it, I ended up buying in Highlands Ranch. I moved here, and in LA I had a house that was the same age that I was, so I wanted something newer. And I thought, yeah, you know what, it'd be kind of nice to have a new house. And really the only place that was a new house that was convenient to my sister, she lived in Ken Carroll at the time, was Highlands Ranch. So anyway, I ended up building a house and turned into, now I absolutely love it. It's wonderful, but I will say when I first, for the first year or two, this was the constant thing that I talked about to myself was, this is like the Stepford Wives. It's just too perfect here, because it sure was not that perfect in LA. So this was a really big culture shock for me. But I've been here 20 years almost, and I love Highlands Ranch now. And I hope if some of you live there or pass through, I hope you love it. And if not, maybe get to know it a little bit better and to like it a little bit more. I think it's a great place, especially coming from LA, where you didn't know anybody. I had a house there for 30 years, and I hardly knew anybody. Didn't get involved in anything, just went to work and back, and my own circle of friends. But here, what I've discovered is, it's just like a small town, even though it's not. But it feels like a small town. So let's talk about then the history of Highlands Ranch. And we thought we would videotape it because we've never done a comprehensive history of Highlands Ranch all at one time. We've done little pieces here and there at various programs or whatever, but we've never done everything all at once. So we thought, well, let's just see what it's like. So that's a little bit about me. I just moved out of Highlands Ranch. I am sorry to say, but I had 3 levels, and the knees and the feet just didn't like those 3 levels, so I've gone from this to this, and I love it. But I do miss Highlands Ranch, but I'm there all the time because I still work full-time. I'm a realtor, so a lot of my clients are there, and I'm always in the ranch showing and then with the Historical Society. I've been with the Historical Society since 2008 and just started out going to the programs, and then they needed some help, so I raised my hand, and then you know how that goes. One thing leads to another. So I've been with the Historical Society for a long time. Love it. Now I do tours. And in fact, I put a lot of material out there on the table. If any of you, feel free to pick it up if you like. You don't have to take anything, but I was able to get a bunch of this and that and the other. And if you're not on our email list, we'd love to have you. So I have a thing out there to be on the email list for the Historical Society. So the society itself, we've been established since '91. We do have a website, thehrhs.org. Pretty simple. There's a board of directors and a leadership team. We're a nonprofit, 501c3, and we do a lot of programs in the community, a lot monthly programs, 3rd Monday of every month. And we also then do tours, and we do presentations. Many of us are docents at the mansion, so we just kind of get out and about, and we have a really good relationship with Highlands Ranch Metro and Highlands Ranch Community Association. And they do programs, as you know, or will know, out in the community. So we get to do a lot of programs with them when they want historical stuff. So it's kind of fun. We have about 200 actual members, and we've got about 2,000 on our email list. We're going to be covering a lot of stuff from a book that we published a couple of years ago or so. And I've got a couple of, I'll just pass them around. I've got a couple of copies of it. You can just kind of take a look at it if you like. They're for sale. They're available in all of the rec centers. It's $26. And we were approached by Arcadia Publishing. You've probably seen these kind of books. A lot of towns have them. And they approached us, and we said, absolutely, we would love to do it. Ours is a hardcover book. Most of the ones that you see are soft cover. And you know why they did that? They did the demographics of Highlands Ranch, and they figured we could afford it. True story. So they said, even though we usually do soft cover, we're going to give you guys the hardcover. So the cost is $26. But it was really good in terms of kind of putting together a lot of stuff in one place. And we had to get a lot of permissions to give to use photos and all of that kind of stuff. And so we just reached out to everybody. For my presentation today, I have more than just photos that are from the book. I have a lot of other photos as well, but a lot of the photos came from the book. So we're going to be covering Highlands Ranch kind of divided into in the beginning, and then some of the notable homesteads and ranches. And I know when I first became associated with the Historical Society, a lot of people said, Highlands Ranch Historical Society, there is none. I heard that over and over and over and over, and I started getting a little upset. It's like, well, that's not right. Of course there is. And really, when you start getting into it, it's fascinating. At least I think so. So so we're going to talk about some of the original people that lived there, the homesteaders and the ranches, and then, of course, the mansion. How many people have been to the mansion? Wow, so most of you, at least it looks like about half of you or so. Hopefully the rest of you will get there soon because it's beautiful and they really do a great job decorating for the holidays. It always looks really, really pretty. So we'll be talking a lot about the mansion and then just a little bit about modern day, kind of how it's organized, and I've got some modern day pictures. So this is Highlands Ranch. It's big. It's about 24 square miles and probably about 10 miles or so across. And the boundaries are basically County Line Road on the north and the back country. We kind of adjoin Cherokee Ranch and Daniels Park on the south. And then on the west, it's Santa Fe, and on the east, it's basically Quebec. It extends a little bit over past Quebec, but basically those are the boundaries of it. So County Line, Santa Fe, back country, and Quebec. So it's a big place. And we'll talk about some of the demographics and the statistics at the very end when we talk about the modern day Highlands Ranch. Oh, you weren't supposed to see that. Okay, so pretend you didn't see it. So now you've had presentations already from who? Castle Rock and Littleton and Sedalia and Louviers. Okay, so out of all of those, or any other place in Highlands Ranch, who do you think has the history that goes back the farthest? I know, I gave it away. Sorry, Jack. You don't win. What would be, without having seen my slide, what would you have said? You'd probably say Highlands Ranch was like one of the newest, huh? But it's not. We win. We win with having the oldest stuff, and that's with our Triceratops. It was just recently in the news. They just recently excavated some of the bones, a limb bone and some vertebrae and some ribs. And it was from the Cretaceous period. And that was about 68 million years ago, give or take a few years. I don't know how there's only one Triceratops that's here, but at least there's one. So if there was one, there must have been more. And I think we win. So here's where the fossil was found. Oh, that was what I was going to say. We had recently talked with Historic Douglas County. And with Historic Douglas County, we were having the same discussion, like who's the oldest? And of course, I said we are. And nobody could remember anything about any fossils, these kind of fossils, in anywhere else in Douglas County. I know, Jack, you might talk about, you have some fossils I know in Lone Tree, up on a ridge somewhere. They're plants. And I know Cherokee has petrified wood. There's petrified wood in Douglas County, but I don't think anybody has anything as exciting as a Triceratops.
There's a whole Colorado dig also, right near the Titan.
And what are they finding?
They're finding animals.
Oh, that's our next slide.
Well, I know it's on the other side of their faces, but they have found some, I want to say mammoth tusks, which go way, way back. And I know there were some more fossils. That's the flying bee branch.
That's flying bee and windcrest.
Yeah. Well, windcrest is there now, but the Bowens had that for years.
Right, yeah. Well, and that's how they found it, because, windcrest just keeps expanding and expanding and expanding. And they were doing more construction, and so they were digging, and it was the construction crew that found the bones. And thank goodness they spoke up, and they stopped the construction in that area, and the Denver Museum of Nature and Science came in and started doing their work, and that's when they found the bones. And they kept doing their construction or doing their excavation until their criteria is once they find a bone, then they keep looking, but if they go a meter out, so about 3 feet or so out, and they haven't found anything else, then they consider that they probably won't find anything. So that happened around July of this year where they stopped then looking for any more bones. So right here, actually not all that far from here, just down the road a piece, down Santa Fe a piece. So I think that's kind of neat. And so, Fred, to get back to your lamb spring, and didn't you just have Jack Warner here recently giving a talk, I think, at one of your programs? So Lamb Spring, and he's obviously, he knows all about it, I don't. But it's not very far from here. In fact, the other day when I was here, I went out and just was kind of looking, trying to see where it would be. So it's not, you can basically see it from here. So we know that if they were at Lamb Spring, they were all in this area. And the site was actually discovered when the man who owned it, Charles Lamb, was just excavating, for his own spring. He wanted to enlarge the water area, the spring area. And he found bones, and then of course he called people, and it ended up with even the Smithsonian coming out to look at the bones. And they figured that they were Ice Age animals from about 13, 14, 15,000 years ago. And they actually found the remains of at least 24 mammoths there. And they said the mammoths were about the size of a modern-day elephant. And in addition to mammoths, then they other things that they found: pronghorn antelopes, similar to today; bison, similar to today; camels. So we had camels here. We had camels and elephants here. Is that cool? Horses, wolves, and they were both similar to today. A ground sloth, and that ground sloth apparently was like the size of an oxen. So he must have been a pretty big little guy. And then the mammoths, and they said that the mammoths were about the size of a modern-day elephant. So anyway, so we've got 66 million years ago and then 13 million years ago. And so I think we win. All right, other early significant events here. Before 1500, this was just a prime hunting ground for the Indians. And then from about 1540 to 1803, Spain and France, and apparently were here and fighting and whatever, owned it. And then it was in 1803 that the Louisiana Purchase happened, and that's when Napoleon sold this great big Louisiana Purchase, I think for 15 million. So we now became the part of the United States. And then, of course, gold was discovered in several Front Range locations around 1859. And then 1862 was the Homestead Act. So the Homestead Act brought a lot more people to the area. And in 1876, Colorado becomes the 38th state. So 100 years after the original, so we were the centennial state. So all around that time, the late 1800s then is when, modern European people, settlers and all, came and started buying property and or filing for claims and then living in the area. So that's really kind of when, real man started, not counting the cavemen or Ice Age men. So let's talk about some of the early settlers, and I'm just going to talk about the ones that were in Highlands Ranch, because they're all over. All of our cities and states and towns and all have them, but I just want to talk about the ones that were more prominent, or that bought land or filed for homesteads and all in our land, in our Highlands Ranch area. So the very first one that I have up there is David Gregory, and I have on there that he was the first homesteader, but I was just reading some other stuff from Douglas County History Research Center, and they said that actually Rufus Clark, he didn't homestead because the Homestead Act wasn't in place yet, but he actually was here around 1859, and then he filed for a homestead here after that. But so anyway, I heard that David Gregory was the first homesteader, and now I'm hearing that Dad Clark also at some point had filed for a homestead. And I don't know anything about David Gregory. But Rufus, or Dad Clark, I'm sure most of us have heard about him. We have a street named after him. We have a street named Dad Clark. And there's a picture of him. He apparently was just like a little ruffian. he had he had run away at a relatively early age, went sailing the ocean blue, and I guess probably picked up a lot of colorful language and drinking and carousing and all kind of things. He ended up getting married and I guess somewhat settling down. And he had been in California with the gold rush, and he found that apparently a lot of the gold rush people in California weren't doing so well. So when he came here, he didn't want to get involved in looking for gold, but instead he decided that he was going to buy some land and then start, I guess, selling stuff. I don't know, at what order all of that came in. But he ended up with buying, at least in our area, about 160 acres in what's today the Highlands Ranch Golf Club. But he also bought land all over the place. He ended up being a very big landowner. He had about 20,000 acres, which is about the size of Highlands Ranch. We're about 22,000 acres. He had about 20,000 acres in what is now the Greenwood Village area. And he started a housing division, if you will, called the Clark Colony. And so if you live in that area, look at your legal description. Here's a realtor coming out. Look at your legal description and you'll see and I actually did. When I learned about this, I thought, I'm gonna test this out. So I did pull a bunch of properties and I looked at the legal description, and sure enough, it said that they were part of the original Clark Colony. And that was kind of the area where Holly and Orchard, kind of in that area, and then east. And of course it's named Orchard because there was a whole bunch of orchards all along it. So he had a really big stretch of land in that area. He also bought property. Apparently one of his first homesteads around 1859 was up off of Santa Fe, and kind of where now basically Santa Fe and Hamden, there's that Overland golf course. That sounds like that was his property there. And he had planted some potatoes, and I'm thinking from kind of what I'm gathering, that might have been where it kind of got its start as the Potato King. In 1 year, he sold $20,000 worth of potatoes. That's a lot of potatoes, $20,000. And so, especially in those days, say in the early 1860s, so he used that then to start buying more and more and more property. So apparently he had some out here, but he was all over. He also was a big donor to the to DU. It was called the Methodist College back then, and he donated something like, 500 acres, something like that, and $500, and got them started with land and all. So he ended up being a really good guy. He got religion. He stopped drinking. Stopped carousing, and then started giving money and things away. So he ended up being good. So it's kind of fun that he's one of our early settlers in the area. We even have a street named after good old Dad Clark. It's also interesting that between 1867 to 1910, there were about 189 homestead filings. When you look at the statistics, more than half of those homestead filings never actually got consummated into where they actually then ended up owning the property. You had to own it for 5 years. You had to put a house on it. You had to actively work with it. So, or you could buy it. You could buy it earlier than that if you had the money to buy it.
He also donated quite a few rail cars to Chicago after the fire, with potatoes.
Oh, really? Interesting. All right. So he was a good guy. He ended up being a really good guy. And he's actually buried in Riverside Cemetery, which is one of the part of Fairmount, near downtown. So he's considered a pioneer of the Denver area. So again, I think it's kind of neat that we've got him in our backyard. Other notable settlers, and we'll talk a little bit about them, is the Underwood Griggs Ranch, the Failing Douglas Ranch, Welty, and the Cheese Ranch, and Plews in the Plews Ranch. And these are the ones that we still have evidence of today. Because even though there were about 189 filings, most of those, again, the statistics are more than 50% of them never continued going on, but you would have the more wealthy homeowners coming in, and then they would start buying up some of these other homesteads and consolidating their ranches and their holdings into bigger properties. And that's what happened with just about all of these guys. They, started small, and then they kept buying and buying and buying until they had good size spread. So these are the 4 today that are still left in Highlands Ranch in one manner or another. Has anybody been to any of these? So, Peggy, where have you?
The cheese ranch.
You've been to the cheese ranch? Okay, good, good. And there's not much there, is there?
No, there's a community garden.
Yeah, and a windmill, but nothing else. Yeah.
And great choke cherries.
Oh, at
Choke cherry trees in Cheese Ranch.
oh yeah? So did you pick them and make,
Yeah, choke cherry.
well, there you go. We'll have to have a tour there. Anybody been to any of these others? No. You guys had better get your walking shoes on here. All of these, they're still there, and they are offered on various tours at various times of the year. And I've done 3 of the tours. And I've been to Feeling Douglas. I haven't been the historian on that one, and Mark in the back has been the historian on that one. So either Highlands Ranch Metro or HRCA will periodically offer tours or programs in these areas, and if it's going to be an historic tour, then they'll ask us to go along to kind of add stuff. So it's kind of fun. So you do have opportunities to get out to see them, and we'll talk about that on each one of them. So the Underwood Griggs Ranch first. That started in about 1871 just as the Underwood Homestead. And that, I forget Mr. Underwood's name, but he married a lady named Lorinda. And then I don't know what happened with Mr. Underwood. I couldn't find that anywhere, but suddenly he's out of the picture. And in 1878, Lorinda Underwood married Lafayette Griggs. And so then they also bought more land. And then it was the Underwood Griggs homestead, but they called it the Pine Tree Ranch. And for the location of it, it's near the base of Wildcat Mountain, so it's on the eastern edge of Highlands Ranch, where Quebec goes. Picture Quebec and MacArthur Ranch Road, or where the Southridge Auditorium is. That's kind of the location, the area where it was. And they had a fairly decent sized spread. I don't know the exact contours, but they ended up with, and again, they all kind of keep buying little ones, so they ended up with a pretty good sized property. So Lorinda, she started out as Palmer. Lorinda Palmer, she married William Underwood. Then Mr. Underwood goes away somehow, and she ends up marrying Lafayette Griggs. And that was in 1878, so it was called the Pine Tree Ranch. And they had cattle and dairy. And apparently once a year they would round up some Mustangs and then break the Mustangs. And then they sold, as most of these people did, they ended up selling to someone. And at that time, most of the time that they would sell is to the people who owned the mansion. They were the big wealthy guys in town, and they were actively looking for ranches for the most part, trying to get other property. So that's what happened with the Griggs Ranch. They sold it to Phillips, who was the mansion owner at the time, and that was in 1924. They were getting older. They didn't have any kids who wanted to continue ranching there, so they ended up selling. So here's a few pictures of it. So this, and forget it, even though it says 1979, that's not right. It says the Underwood Griggs Homestead as it appeared in the summer of 1979. I think what they meant was in 1924, probably when they sold it. Because that's not what it looked like in 1979, I can guarantee you. But it was a very nice house. I've been in it, not in it in this condition, in it in its current condition, but you can just tell it looked like it was solidly built. It had nice big baseboards, lath and plaster, and looked like a very nice house. It even had a kitchen in it. There was a spring on the property, so they had good water, and they were also by the Big Dry Creek. So they had water from that as well. So apparently, and obviously they have a well with our thing there. So it was a very nice ranch. This is what it looks like today. Is that a shame or is that a shame? So this was taken about, probably about 3-4 years ago during one of our, well, actually as a historical society, we got to go on a tour of all these backcountry areas. I think that's when we took this. So it's kind of from the same angle as that other picture that I just showed you with the bay window and all that. So here's what that looks like today. And I just think it's a shame. So kind of what happened is it was sold to the Phillips or to the mansion owner, and I don't think they did anything with it then. They wanted the land, but they didn't really, obviously, use the house or try to preserve it or anything, which is, again, it's a shame. You can't see it from the road. When you're driving on Quebec, you can look over there. So when you're driving south on Quebec, past MacArthur Ranch Road, you pass the high school, and if you look to your right, that would be their property, but it's kind of down in a little valley, so you can't really see it. But periodically, HRCA will have tours where you can go in. They've done it before where you walk in from Griggs Road, for those of you that know where that is. And if you don't, just get in Highlands Ranch and start driving around. It's kind of fun. But they named the road Griggs Road, and so you drive in from Griggs Road. As soon as you get to Griggs Road and the pavement goes away and now it's dirt, that's where you would turn to the left and you would, kind of walk in back, and this is what you would find. So obviously, time has taken its toll, and probably vandals too. They now have a big fence, kind of as you can see with barbed wire and all that, all the way around it. In addition to the house, there's another picture of it. So this was during the summer. And you can barely even get up to the house. There's this undergrowth, and there's like long thorns. So you can't even hardly get to it. One of the neat things about the property, though, they had square nails. So you could tell they were handmade nails. And I have some. I don't know what I did with them. So they're somewhere. I just recently moved. I can't even find my cat. I've been looking for her for a year, let alone finding nails. But the nails are neat. They're handmade, hand-pounded square nails. This is Norma Griggs. Sometimes I feel like Nancy Drew, Girl Detective. I like that girl part the best. But I put on my Nancy Drew, Girl Detective hat one day and just started looking for some family members. And lo and behold, we found Norma Griggs. She is the wife of the grandson of Lafayette Griggs. And she had been at the property, I think it was like in 1978, somewhere around there. It was right after she married him, and he wanted to show her his, where his grandparents lived. So they came out to the property. So she's telling me about it, and she says, I really want to see the silo. And I said, Norma, there is no silo. She says, yes, I really want to see that silo. I says, Norma, there's no silo. I don't know what the kids did in the old days in the silo, but they did something. So anyway, so we're walking all around, and she's in her 80s, and she is spry as can be. So we're walking all around. I just put that picture in just to kind of show the foundation, but it's got rhyolite, and as you know, from Castle Rock. So it's got part of the foundation there was rhyolite. I also found some petrified wood in the foundation. Anyway, it's a neat house, or would have been. So we're walking round and round. They still have some of the corrals, and in fact, the corrals are actually used to this day for cattle and all that. But then what do you think we found? I had never been back there. Here's all the corrals, but we kept walking around. We saw that great big pile of rubble, and look at what's in the ground. The silo. And she had described it to me. Let's see, you see my little red thing there? Here's the silo. She had described it as a clay silo. And we couldn't, again, you can't see it until you round the corner, and there it was, and knocked down on the side was all the pieces of the red clay. I think what happened, and I'm not happy about Mission, but my Mission, I think, had to have done it, because they did the same thing on the cheese ranch. They purposely got rid of the house because their kids were, growing up and vandalizing and all that. It had to have been the case here, is that Mission just came in and bulldozed the whole, and didn't care about the house. But anyway, we found the silo, so that was kind of exciting. And Norma is just a little sweetie. And today, and you probably see it all over Highlands Ranch if you're in the backcountry, you'll see signs that say no, no trespassing. It'll say Shea Homes. And many times you'll see cattle in the land. And here on the Griggs, almost every time when I drive down Griggs Road, you'll see cattle there. And that's because it's also like I guess it's a good tax break. It's still being used for livestock. They have leased out the rights to the cattle to the Clough Cattle Company. So you'll see a sign that'll say Clough Cattle Company or Clough Cattle. And they're definitely in the Griggs property. I was just there like a week or two ago, and there were cattle all over the place. And they still use a lot of those, the chutes and the corrals are still usable. Now, I'm putting Daniels Park in here as part of Griggs for a reason. Daniels Park is not in Highlands Ranch, but it's close by Griggs, because if you're on Griggs Road and you keep going south, eventually you're going to be hitting Daniels Park Road. And it has some historical significance in our area. And that, has everybody been up to Daniels Park? Most everybody? Good, because if you haven't, or you haven't been there for a while, actually, I don't like what they've done with it. I was just there about 2 weeks ago, and I hadn't been there for several months. And they've been doing a lot of repairs and enhancements and all that. And remember that they used to have all the picnic tables kind of down the ledge. They're all gone. There's no more picnic tables, and they have big fences up, so you can just barely get up there and kind of look down and remember when you'd have happy hour down there, but no more. But Daniels Park Road, or that area, has been an important road in our area. It was called the First Territorial Road, or the Territorial Road. And so it was actually a main thoroughfare from downtown Denver, however much downtown Denver would have been at the time, but from downtown Denver all the way out to Pueblo. So it was used as a thoroughfare, and it paralleled right along Griggs property. And so I mentioned that they had dairy cattle, with their milk and all, and probably other goods too. They would go into Sedalia, because they had the main road, which just took them right down to Sedalia. So it was an important part. And so just a couple of little comments here about Daniels Road. It's now a park, and they've been doing all these enhancements, so drive on down there if you haven't for a while. And as you drive from here, from Highlands Ranch to Daniels Park Road, you see this nice big barn and a really big silo. And when I've done some programs more with the kids, I've used a picture of that silo just to kind of show them, like we had those in Highlands Ranch, but I don't think we have any more of them because it's not on the Griggs anymore. But Florence Martin was a lady from Australia, and she inherited part of the Daniels when the Daniels department store, Daniels and Fisher and all that kind of stuff. The husband and wife were killed, apparently unexpectedly or together, or I'm not sure the whole story on that, but she was a good friend, so she inherited part of that fortune. Isn't that nice? And so she came out from Australia. She bought some land out there. You can see, at Daniels Park, the fantastic view that you have. So you can kind of see the view. Now, this was the barn and the silo. Her house was farther down, more closer to the edge, so she had an even better view. And she donated something like 93 acres or whatever to the city of Denver for a park, and she specified she wanted it named Daniels Park because that's where the money came from her friends. And then a few years later, her house burned down, and so she donated like almost 1,000 acres total as part of the Daniels Park entire complex. But this is still remaining, and you see it all the time. And when you do go now, they have a new walking path, which is a good improvement. They have a walking path right past it, not up to it because there's a big fence. But at least you can, because I used to always just pull over to the side of the road and just take my pictures, but now you can actually walk there. So that is one improvement. And out on the edge of her, of that, if you kept going out towards her house, she had a gazebo where you could sit there and look at everything. Next time you go to Cherokee Castle and you stand on the terrace, look out the terrace towards north, and you'll see that gazebo out kind of all by itself. You can still see the gazebo there. And this is just a view, and this is actually overlooking the Sanctuary Golf Course, which is so beautiful. That was owned by the owner of Remax. And that was, what do you have up there? Pikes Peak. So just a beautiful area. So it's really a lovely area to visit and to bring out-of-state people to. And then just down the road, like a couple of 100 feet, so literally walking distance, like a block or so from Daniels Park Road, the shelter that we saw a minute ago, is Kit Carson's Last Campfire. Has anybody ever been to Kit Carson's Last Campfire? You didn't even probably know it was there, huh? But it's there. So this monument is right in front of Sanctuary Golf Course. When you would turn in to go into Sanctuary Golf Course, but don't go in. Instead, there's a little road paralleling along the wall, and just go down that just like 100 feet, and you'll find this monument, and it said, "This tablet marks the spot where Kit Carson, accompanied by his friend Major D.C. Oakes, lit his last campfire May of 1868. In Castle Rock, they probably talked about D.C. Oakes, and so they were on the Territorial Road. Kit Carson was sick, he was going home. He knew he probably didn't have long to live, so they were stopping for lunch, and he said, well, let me do the campfire because it's probably going to be my last one, or something like that. And so they have that monument. And then, I don't think it's the campfire, but right in front of it, like 5 feet away, they have a nice round ring of rocks. It's like, is that the campfire? I don't think so, but you can pretend. So that's also right there along there. And in fact, that Territorial Road right there up on the top there, it's on the ridge of the hill, that was known as Riley's Hill. And robbers would kind of lay in wait because stagecoaches and travelers would be coming along there. So that was kind of, I guess, a treacherous area at some point. And also, right along that road, so just a little bit farther now, we've just left Daniels Park, and we've left the campfire, and we're continuing now. We're going down Daniels Road. And at the first property that you get to once you turn onto Daniels Road, heading south, the very first property that you get to is the Pretty Woman Ranch. Has anybody ever seen that there? It's because unless you know it's there, you're not going to see it. It's like really overgrown, but it is literally right along the road, like about 100 or 200 feet in, but kind of covered with trees. And it was a stagecoach stop. Remember, the Territorial Road was a major road in that area. So it was a stagecoach stop. Sylvester and Elizabeth Richardson were the couple, the husband and wife that started that. It was like in 1861, I think. And they only had it there for 3-4 years. And then the road kind of switched a little bit, so they didn't get as many travelers along. And then Sylvester and Elizabeth ended up divorcing, and Sylvester went on down exploring in Gunnison, and he's known as the founder of Gunnison Valley, or the Gunnison County. So, and Elizabeth went back to her parents. They had a child. Any ideas what they might have named the child? In the 1860s, early 1860s? Denver. Because Denver was just getting started kind of then, so they named him Denver. And it's rumored, I don't know that it's been proven, but it's rumored that he was the first white child born in Denver. So anyway, so it's kind of neat. You've got Pretty Woman Ranch, and you know how most of us, as we age, we don't look as pretty as we might have when we were young. Not so. With Pretty Woman Ranch, this is what it looked like 150 years ago. You want to see what it looks like today? There it is. Is that not pretty or what? So this is the property that Pretty Woman Ranch is on. And here's the realtor in me. It's for sale. So if any of you would like to own a piece of history, you can buy this beautiful 10,000 square foot mansion, 55 acres. It's only $7,600,000, and that's been reduced almost by $1 million because it's been on the market for a long time. But that's what the house looks like now. Well, they must. I mean, they haven't invited me over for tea, but I've seen the inside on pictures and it's beautiful. It's gorgeous, gorgeous, gorgeous. 55 acres, and they have all of the horse facilities and at the base of the cliff there. It's just beautiful. So that's what $7.5 million can buy you nowadays. And then if you just continue a little bit farther, you've got Cherokee Ranch and Castle. So look at all of the neat things that are just right there in just a very short little area along that territorial road. And if you haven't been to Cherokee, you might want to consider going. They have all kind of teas and activities and all that kind of stuff. We do tours. We just finished one. And Mark's wife is a docent there. And you've listened to John and Meg, John Lake and Meg Anderson, I think, a year or two ago. They were the butler and the caterer at Cherokee, so that's just down the road a piece. So lots of history just there on that little stretch of Daniels Park Road. And again, the Griggs would have, that's how they would have gone into Sedalia. And then also in that area then is the failing Douglas property. And when you're, again, I was just at Cherokee. When you're at Cherokee, you're out on that terrace. If you look out towards the same direction to see that gazebo, you'll also see the failing Douglas property. You can actually see the barn and their big buildings, so they're still there. So here's a little bit about failing Douglas. How are we doing? It's located in the back country of HRCA, and there were a lot of Failing. It was a big family, Henry Failing, and I think it was Abigail, the wife. They had 7 children. And back there in those times, just having one homestead really wasn't enough. You needed more and more and more, because you needed quite a few acres just to support one cattle. So many people then would just keep, trying to get more property just to make a go of it, and that's what the Failings did. They had a lot of homesteads or purchased a lot of land. So they were also in that area not too far from the territorial road, and they did a lot of their interactions then would have been in Sedalia. And in fact, they owned, what was it, the meat market? Meat market in Sedalia. And so these properties are still there. In 1913, Abigail was sick. She had had a stroke. The Failing family sold the property to the Douglas Investment Company, and then the Douglas Investment Company ran ranching operations for many years there. And this is the barn. Look at, that's a great big barn, and it's in really nice condition. I don't know why, I don't know why it's still standing, but it is, and it's really nice that it is. Apparently the Failings had a lot of barn dances. They had some musicians in the family. So it was a very active community. In addition to that, they of course had chicken coops and corrals and all that kind of stuff. And notice behind the barn is a silo, only that's not a clay silo. Oops, and there's another outbuilding, another big outbuilding, not in as good of condition. There's the house, great big house.
That's what the barn looks like today.
Say that again?
That's what the barn looks like today.
Oh, is that what the barn looks like today? Oh, thank you, Mark. Okay, so yeah, it's looking worse then. And then this is the house, and this is what the house looks like today, if I'm remembering right, yes? Mark was the last one that was there. And here's the silo. It's really kind of neat. It's an octagonal shaped silo, and it's made out of wood. So it's not the kind of the typical clay silos that you see, clay tile. And it's really in good condition. It's kind of like tongue and groove. I mean, you can see the boards pushed together. There's a little marker on it that says it was built in 1920, so that would have been the Douglas Investment Company that did that. There's one other one that I'm aware of in Douglas County, and that's if you take Parker Road and you're heading down to Colorado Springs, just before you get to the El Paso border, not too far from the El Paso Douglas County border, you'll see another one. It's right next to the side of the road, only they've covered it. It looks like they've covered it in plywood or something to kind of protect it. So there's the 2 of them that I'm aware of. There were a lot of these?
Well, there's a lot of them in the county growing up as a kid.
Of these kind?
Lots of them.
Really?
I think people tore them apart for the barn.
Oh. And it looks like good wood.
Some of the ones that tore apart and ended up going to Denver to display the wood. The wood was used a lot.
Oh, neat. So he says, if you couldn't hear him, he said that he remembers a lot of them as a kid, in the area. And I think it's really neat. I think it'd be great if they would preserve it. It doesn't seem like HRCA or Metro really is in the preservation mode. All right, moving on. Let's finish here with our homesteads, and then we'll take our little break. The Big Dry Creek Cheese Ranch, that's still here, which is really nice. That was started by Johann Welty and Placido Gasner in about 1879. They were immigrants from Austria, and then they owned it for a long time until about 1942-ish, I think, is when they sold it, but they really stopped using it effectively sometime in the 30s. They figured that that was probably a result of the Great Depression. So somewhere in the 30s when it wasn't good to be ranching there anymore. So the Johann Welty and Gasner started it. Gasner died not too long after they started it, but his widow retained her rights, and it was one big happy family because Welty and Gasner's wives were sisters. So they all lived there happily ever after. The Welty daughter married a man named Philip Renner, another immigrant, and Renner joined the team, and then they had just one great big happy, really productive, really very well respected ranch, and they did dairy, cheese, and beer. And for the cheese, it was Limburger and brick cheese, and the bricks were about the size of a shoebox, really a big brick. And I think they went for about 50 cents a pound, somewhere probably a little bit more than that. And in fact, potatoes were going for 25 cents a pound in '59, which would have been when Rufus Clark was back there selling potatoes. He had to sell a lot of potatoes to make 20,000. And these people, the cheese ranch was so well respected that a journal called Scientific Farmer came out, and they had him featured in 2 separate issues. There was so much, and they just raved about how beautiful the ranch was. There was running water, underground hot water to the ranch buildings, and they had the chicken coops and the slaughterhouse and the cheese making factory and the house. They had everything. They had extensive orchards. They even grew mango wurzels. Ooh, do I hear any oohs? Anybody know what a mango wurzel is? It's like a sugar beet, only for animals. So apparently that's what they fed their animals, mango wurzels. So here's good old Johann Welty, and what does he have in his hand? Beer. And why does he have beer? Because he's Austrian. And what do the Germans and the Austrians do? They drink beer. Remember that famous Austrian Arnold Schwarzenegger? Yes, my favorite. What one of Arnold's sayings was, when you're a baby, you drink milk. When you're a grown-up, you drink beer. So that's what good old Johann is doing there. Here's the family. These people, this must have been party central. They worked really hard and they played really hard. I have another picture. I didn't include it here because it's really grainy and you wouldn't be able to see it very well. But I have another big picture of a lot of family and friends, and it was mainly the European community in this area that would get together. And in that other picture, I'm not kidding, almost every man in there has his very proudly displayed mug of beer. In addition to that, they had some of their native clothing. They had some native instruments. So apparently they were known for being very social and having lots of parties. Here's their house. It was a beautiful house. We've talked to people that have been in the house, and everybody agreed that it was a lovely house. It was very well built. And this was the back of the house. The front of the house was on the other side. And this is what it looked like when Mission took it over, when Mission bought the property in 78. So the barns had been, basically collapsed. The house was still in decent shape, and they actually used the house. They had some of their hired help live in the house. The men, the cowboys, called it East Ranch. And apparently they also called it Cheese Ranch. And apparently they also called Griggs East Ranch, because they were on the eastern side of the property. And then at some point, Mission had the house and everything just razed because kids and vandals were getting in there, and they just didn't want they weren't into historic preservation. They just wanted, you know, no more problems anymore. So unfortunately, these pictures were taken by Mission, Viejo, when they took over, and so look at how beautiful the land is, but the buildings are in really bad disrepair. Here's that picture of that big cheese, big block of cheese, and here's Philip Renner. So he then kind of took over from Welty, and at some point Welty's sold or deeded the property to Philip Renner. He was very well respected, and he went into Littleton. So his whole basis of operation was in Littleton, whereas Griggs, their neighbor to the south, went to Sedalia. There's their big Dry Creek cheese wagon, and here's what it looks like today. Really, there's a community garden, as Peggy said. You can kind of see it down there. That is not the original windmill. That's a kind of a replica, but it's very pretty. And it's a beautiful park to walk through. When I first moved here 20 years ago, I could see foundations. You can't see them anymore. It's just totally overgrown now. But the foundations were just off to the side here of the windmill on the other side of Big Dry Creek. It's called the Cheese Ranch, and it's over off of Highlands Ranch Parkway. You know where the post office is? The post office on Quebec and Highlands Ranch? It's right there. It's right close to that. And you have to access it by Sugarstone. I think the address is something like 9191 Sugarstone, or you can look it up. But it's a beautiful place to walk, especially in autumn. So you might want to just take a quick little walk over there. And shall we take a break now? Okay, let's do a break, and then we'll come back. However long you guys normally spend. 10 minutes. 10-minute break. Okay.
Is everybody ready to start again?
Boy, that 10 minutes goes fast, doesn't it? All right, so let's fly through the flying bee here. So this is the last of our homesteads that we're going to talk about. And let me make one just comment. I was talking about Cherokee Castle and Daniels Park Road and the last campfire. That's not in Highlands Ranch, but I included it because it's so interesting. And it's also along the Territorial Road, which is, you know, the people in Highlands Ranch, before it was called Highlands Ranch, used. But that's like in Castle Pines or Sedalia.
Where is the Territorial Road?
Well, it's Daniels Park Road, which is the Territorial Road. And in Highlands Ranch now, that would be Colorado. You know where Colorado is? Colorado would have kind of snaked up there and then angled over to become Daniels Park Road. So Colorado is the Territorial Road. Okay, so the Plouffe Ranch is the last of the homesteads that we're going to talk about. And that now is on the totally different area from where we've been. We've been kind of over on the east side and in the back country. Now Cheese Ranch was also on the east side. Now we're going to go to the extreme west side of Highlands Ranch. And the Plouffe Ranch is basically at county line and Santa Fe, or that's where it would have been. Kind of boundaries have shifted. So the first person who started in that area, kind of, again, where county line and Santa Fe would be, right at the county line. So one side was Arapahoe County, the other side is Douglas County. The first person who built in that little area right in there was Matthew Plouffe, and that was in about 1906. And he owned that property and built the home and developed it until about 1937. And then he sold that to a lady named Elizabeth Hamlin, and she was the mother-in-law of a fellow named Smiling Charlie. Smiling Charlie is my favorite guy. Wait till you see him. And that is going to take us between Littleton Cemetery, which I have next to Matthew Plouffe's, because Matthew worked at Littleton Cemetery, and he also worked at Woolhurst, and Smiling Charlie was also there at Woolhurst, and kind of that whole area, which was on the other side of Santa Fe, which is Blakeland. So that whole little area is all kind of, you know, people interacted together. So even though they're not in Highlands Ranch, we're going to talk about them for a little bit. But now back to the Plews Ranch. We've got then Hamlin and Smiling Charlie owned it till about 44. They sold it to a Fred Eberhardt family. The Eberhardts had it then until, and they used it as a summer home. And then they sold to the Gates Rubber Company, and Gates only had it just for a very, very, very short time. And they only bought it because they wanted to trade land with Johnny Bowen. Johnny Bowen had some land that the Gates Rubber Company wanted, so they used that as we'll give you this if you'll give us that. So we'll talk about that. And that's how the name became the Flying Bee, because Johnny Bowen had an airplane. So he was flying, and his name was B. Bowen. And then, they had 4 of them. Oh, and when I first moved here, I remember seeing the airplane and all that, but that's been a few years ago.
They pulled up all the around Coors Field and different things. They would pull the streamers.
Oh, they did? Oh, I didn't know that.
Brother, there was Johnny and Marty. Marty was the younger one. Johnny the older one.
Oh, neat. Can y'all hear that? They would fly and do the streamers around Coors Field. And it was a big family. They had a lot of family members living on that property. And then finally, Johnny Bowen, things had changed. The C-470 came in. It wasn't the nice, quiet retirement place that they wanted, so they sold to Erickson, which is Windcrest. And then in 2006, Windcrest gave just a few acres, something like 5 acres or so, to Highlands Ranch Metro District to make a park. So we're going to talk about all this kind of stuff here. So we've got good old Matthew Plews. Isn't he a handsome fellow? He was very young here. He's from England, and he was a landscaper, a gardener, a groundskeeper. So he was the master groundskeeper for Woolhurst, can't say that, which was the big estate just across the way a piece. And we'll talk more about Woolhurst here. And Matthew Plews also built extensive greenhouses because, again, he was a landscaper, a gardener, so that's what he did. He was known as the Johnny Appleseed of Douglas and Arapahoe counties. He was also employed at the Littleton Cemetery. You're probably wondering, what the heck was he doing at the cemetery? I'll tell you in a minute. And he was very active in the community. And that's kind of what we found with most of these people that we're talking about, especially the mansion people, but like Plews and all, they got involved in the community. They just didn't stay in their little ranch, here in Highlands Ranch, but they were very involved. So good old Matthew Plews, there's a picture of his homestead. This was before it was called the Flying Bee. There's the house, and that house is still standing. Doesn't look like that, but pretty much it does. It's white now. And then he built extensive greenhouses, and he had fruit trees, and he sold a lot of produce and all of that kind of stuff, mainly in Littleton. His, just like the cheese ranch, his basis, he went to Littleton. But he also went to like the Douglas County Fair, and he went to Asequia, which is just on the other side of Santa Fe. He was on the school board, so he was involved in the whole community around there. And here's one of his business cards. Ornamental shade and fruit trees, shrubbery, small fruit, roses, everything for the hardy garden. A trial order solicited. His address was RFD, what is that, rural, okay, whatever, number 1, box 20. So kind of cute. And his phone was Littleton 1834. So kind of cute. That was probably in the early 1900s then, 1915 or something like that, 20. And here's a picture then of the family. Mr. Matthew is now getting older. He's the one crouching down, not wearing the hat. There's Matthew right there. And that was his father. And there's family members. And so they had, again, a good-sized family. And he also then participated, that was in 1925, with the Douglas County Fair. So they were, involved in the community. Here he is at the cemetery. This was from the 1922 Record Journal of Douglas County. Matt Plews is busily employed at the Littleton Cemetery, planting trees, graveling driveways and walks, and seeding vacant lots. All of these improvements add much to the appearance of the silent city where many of our loved ones are already resting. Isn't that kind of cool? That's right, I forgot to mention some of the other people that are in the Littleton Cemetery. I'll have to do that. So here is what the cemetery looks like today. Look at those trees that good old Matthew Plews planted. Does it not indeed look like it's grown? Because that was in the early 20s, so gosh, almost 100 years ago. So I would say he did a good job. Good old Matt Plews, and he is in fact buried in the Littleton Cemetery. So there's Matthew.
Do you have a picture of Alfred Packard?
No, that was on your Littleton. I know. Sedalia had their monster, and Littleton had their cannibal. But we have our Triceratops. And we have gangsters. The other people that were buried that were buried and are still there at the Littleton Cemetery, the Griggs family is there. And Lorinda, the wife, Lorinda's brothers, Lauren and Levi, are both buried there. And in fact, it's reported, I haven't done anything to prove it, but it's reported that Lauren Palmer, which was Mrs. Griggs's brother, was the very first official resident of the cemetery. So kind of cool. And the Failings. The Failings was a big family, so they're all over the place. They're in the Littleton Cemetery. Some of them are in Fairmont. Some of them are in Bear Canyon. And I would assume Castle Rock last week, he mentioned that they're having a walking tour of the Bear Canyon Cemetery next Saturday. So if you have nothing better to do, next Saturday, I think it's like 5 o'clock, they're doing a walking tour of the Bear Canyon Cemetery, which is in Sedalia. We haven't done it yet of Littleton Cemetery. It's on my list of things to do one of these days because all of our pioneers are there.
Springer's there also.
Springer is there as well. Yeah, we'll get to, yeah.
Are there any cemeteries in Highlands Ranch?
Yes, there actually is. It's at the church, Cherry Hills Community Church. They have it's not a cemetery, it's where you're in the wall, a mausoleum. Yeah, but I think that's the only one. And the one on County Line, I think that's in Arapahoe County, because County Line. Yeah. Do they have a cemetery? I mean, do they? They do? Oh, I didn't know St. Andrews did. Yeah, Cherryhurst Church. Cherry Hills Church. Too many Hursts. So yeah, but most of our pioneers are either in Bear Canyon or in Littleton Cemetery. So the next owner then, when the Plews sold, they sold to Elizabeth Hamblin, who was the mother-in-law of Smiling Charlie, and his real name was Ova. Would you like your name to be Ova? Smiling Charlie Ova Stevens. And I'm going to read this to you because you can't read it back there. It says, O.E. or Smiling Charlie Stevens, who usually doesn't smile, smiled yesterday when he really didn't have anything to smile about. Stevens was all set to be freed on a $50,000 bond, but one of his friends decided not to post the necessary property, so Charlie went back to jail. He will try again today. That was from the Rocky Mountain. Charlie was a gangster. He was involved in prostitution, having brothels. He was involved in gambling. They were involved in car bombing. They probably did murder. They probably did all kinds of things. He was involved with the Smaldones, the crime family from Denver. So that's why he didn't have anything to smile about, because this was one of his many trips back and forth to prison. And his mother-in-law had to buy it because in the 37 he was in prison. Probably down in, they said in the state penitentiary, so that must have been in Canyon City. So here's some of his interesting exploits, and I'm including him because obviously they owned the place, but he was also involved in all that surrounding area. So he operated the Blakeland Inn, and that was just on the other side of Santa Fe, and the street is still there, Blakeland. You see the street still there. It was a Mrs. Blake who had a poultry farm, and she served, was it chicken dinners or coffee or whatever? And so anyway, he operated, and apparently he had a lot of property all over the place. And I don't even know all the names because the names keep changing in the newspapers. But he operated the Blakeland Inn, and these were like houses of ill repute, that kind of stuff, and gambling. And then Stevens and the Smaldone brothers were convicted of car bombing their partner, Leo Barnes, in 1937, because Leo also owned another nearby establishment. So I guess they wanted to get rid of the competition, so they car bombed him. Leo didn't die, but they went to prison for it. And then he was incarcerated then at the state pen from 39 to 44. And then he also owned more property at various times, on and off at various times in that area near Blakeland. He had a brothel. They did gambling. It was rumored that at the Flying Bee, when they owned it, that phone lines had been installed. Remember, he's in prison, but he's still got his gang and his family and all that. It was rumored that phone lines were installed in the house to facilitate racehorse betting. And then we recently heard from someone who heard from someone, and that who worked, a fellow that worked there, and he said, yes, we did find evidence. I haven't talked to him firsthand, but that's what we heard. So Smiling Charlie, then the family, they sold it in 1944, and instead then they purchased Woolhurst. And this is a little bit more on Blakeland. It was also called Broadacres at various times. The poultry farm south of Littleton adjoining Woolhurst was converted into a night spot under the name of Broadacres, Blakeland Inn, etc. So they had a bunch of names for this. This was in 1944. And here is one of his last places. In fact, this is where Smiling Charlie died, and that was in, I think, 1965. And that building is still there. And that was converted into a brothel, and they had gambling, and they had all kind of things. And does anybody know where this building is? That's what it looks like to this day. But it's close to Blakeland. So if you'll turn into Blakeland, and then you make an immediate hard right, and you go around right adjoining the freeway, it's the state park office. So that's the state park office, and that was owned by good old Smiling Charlie, and in fact, he died in the back bedroom back in there is where, no, on the other side, you can't see it from here, but on the other side is where he died. And we had heard, and we're going to see Woolhurst in just a minute, he owned Woolhurst, which is right across the freeway. C-470 is there, but it didn't used to be a freeway. So he bought Woolhurst, and apparently must have still owned this because they had a tunnel that, and you've heard about the tunnel, that because Woolhurst was on Arapahoe County and this was in Douglas County, and so the police, when they would raid one, then they'd go under the tunnel, and then the Arapahoe police couldn't go over to Douglas County. To me, it seems like they would have the Arapahoe police on one side and the Douglas police on the other, but who am I? So this house had the tunnel in it. And I was in there and I was talking to them and I said, can I see it? And they said, no, it's gone now. And it was just blocked off. But they says, yeah, the entrance to the tunnel was downstairs. So the staff there confirmed it, that the tunnel was there, and now they're doing all that work on the freeway. So is that not cool or what? So this was the house that he apparently died in. Now we're going to talk about Woolhurst, because remember now they sold Flying Bee in 44 and he bought Woolhurst. So I'm going to show you a video about Woolhurst. It's like 5 minutes, and it'll tell you all about it.
Located at the southwest corner of Santa Fe Drive and Highway C-470, lies one of Littleton's most colorful and infamous parcels of land. U.S. Senator Edward Wolcott purchased the 410-acre ranch in northern Douglas County in 1888. Soon after, he bought 230 adjoining acres just north of the ranch in southern Arapahoe County. It was there that he built a sprawling Tudor mansion and appropriately named it Woolhurst. Senator Wolcott was one of Colorado's most influential Republicans during the early days of statehood. In August 1898, he hosted a benefit for Spanish-American war veterans that attracted nearly 10,000 people to the estate. The extravagant carnival-like event featured a candy booth decorated as a battleship, military bands, a geisha tea house, Turkish tents, vaudeville acts, fortune-telling, and much more. The greatest spectacle of the day was a mock battlefield, where Denver's 15th Infantry routed a much larger Spanish army. After Wolcott's death in 1905, purchased by Thomas Walsh, who made his fortune when he discovered gold at the Camp Bird mine, 6 miles southwest of York, Colorado. Walsh, who had ambitions to be a Republican senator, hosted a breakfast for then Secretary of War William Howard Taft in 1907. During one of his later visits as President of the United States, Woolhurst was renamed Clonmel and christened by Taft with a small silver hammer. The Walsh family is perhaps best known for its association with the curse of the Hope Diamond. In 1911, Thomas Walsh purchased the diamond for his beloved daughter, Evelyn Walsh McLean, who held on to it until her death in 1947. According to legend, Walsh McLean was so proud of the diamond, she affixed it to her dog's collar. But owning the diamond came at a steep price. First, her mother-in-law died. Her son died at the age of 9. Her husband left her for another woman and later died in a mental hospital. And finally, her daughter died of a drug overdose at the age of 25. The legendary Hope Diamond is now housed at the Smithsonian Museum in Washington, D.C. In 1910, Woolhurst entered a quiet period in Morris Bennett bought the estate as a summer home. This peaceful era ended in 1944 when Bennett's widow sold Woolhurst to a shady character named Ova Elijah Smiling Charlie Stevens. Stevens was a well-known ex-convict and reputed gambling figure who promptly converted the property to the Woolhurst Saddle Club. Guests who were previously welcomed by smiling maids and butlers were now greeted by steely-eyed gangsters who peered at each new guest suspiciously through the front door's peephole. Visitors were carefully scrutinized now that Smiling Charlie's Club catered to Denver's elite as a speakeasy and a casino. The casino was connected to the Arapahoe County Manor House by an underground tunnel. The passageway was used by gamblers to flee from Arapahoe County and into Douglas County, or vice versa, where each county sheriff had no jurisdiction. On March 10, 1946, 13 armed bandits raided the club. According to the Rocky Mountain News, escaped with $75,000 in gambling money and another $75,000 in jewelry and cash. The Woolhurst Saddle Club was padlocked for a year, pending an investigation. A controversial case that ensued ended with a conviction for Smiling Charlie and his partner Edward Jordan in 1947. They were fined $1,000 each. The robbery was never solved. Authorities believe that the gunmen were gangsters from Kansas City and Denver. In 1950, Edward Jordan purchased Smiling Charlie's stake in the Woolhurst Saddle Club and reopened it as a restaurant and nightclub. That luck hit again in February 1951, when much of the old manor house was destroyed by fire. A cook and dishwasher were found dead in the aftermath. Not one to be deterred, Jordan rebuilt and reopened the restaurant and nightclub. The club hosted many nationally known entertainers, including Rowan and Martin of Latin fame. In May of 1958, 14 guests were arrested in a gambling raid. The Woolhurst Club and the state of Colorado soon signed a no gambling act for 1 year. The judge who signed the order called the agreement an unusual procedure. Luckily for Jordan, the agreement was signed shortly before a court hearing, where the state was determined to close the club. In 1971, Edward Jordan sold the Woolhurst Club to Codetta Corporation. Codetta developed the area around the manor house into a mobile home park. On March 29, 1976, the Woolhurst Manor House burned down for the final time. The cause of the fire remains unknown to this day. The curse of the Hope Diamond? You decide. The area that was once home to a sprawling mansion with an illustrious history is now home to the Woolhurst Mobile Home Community.
So this is, you can see how close it is to Erickson and to Flying Bee. This is as you're driving out, there's Erickson. So everything was so interrelated there. It's just, isn't that kind of fun? The Hope Diamond, who knew that it was in our own backyard? All right, so, and an interesting story, before we get to Fred Eberhardt, just real quickly, I think it was around that same time when they had the raid and, the gangsters came in and took all that money. It was about that same time that Johnny Bowen and their family lived really close by. They had not bought the Flying Bee yet, wasn't the Flying Bee yet, but they lived really close by, basically at Broadway and County Line. They owned that property, which is now South Park. Smiling Charlie came to them and they said, we'll sell you a piece of property. I don't know what piece of property, but we'll sell you a piece of property, but we've got to have $25,000 tomorrow. And Johnny Bowen and his father, they said, we didn't have that money, so they went to the bank. The bank would only give them $20,000, and they somehow raised another $5,000 because they really wanted whatever the property was that Smiling Charlie wanted to sell them. So they were probably connected. Don't know, but probably connected. Okay, so Fred Eberhardt owned the property next. He was a mechanical engineer. They used it as a summer retreat. Eberhardt was a very famous, he built it up into a very famous business. They sold gears for Hoover Dam. They had numerous patents, etc. His phrase was more horsepower for the dollar. They sold the property he sold his business to Borg Warner in '56. He was honored as one of 10 outstanding leaders in the field by the Mechanical Engineers Society. So he was very well known. They only used it as a summer retreat. We've met some of his family. They're still in the area. And then when Eberhardt sold it, he sold it actually to Gates Rubber Company. Gates Rubber Company only owned it for a very short time, and that's because Gates Rubber Company wanted the property that Johnny Bowen lived on, the family owned, which was there at Broadway and County Line, because that was also, Gates Rubber Company had their business there, what do you call it? Office building or whatever, and they wanted more property there. And Johnny Bowen family was a holdout. They said, no, we love the property, we don't want to sell. So the Gates Rubber Company bought the Flying Bee. They showed it to, and obviously Bowens would have known about it, and then the Bowens couldn't pass by. They thought it was a good deal. So they bought it then, the family, and a lot of different family members lived there, and they owned it until 2004, so they were there for a long time. And they named it the Flying Bee because he flew an airplane. They had a ranch out in Strasbourg, so he would fly back and forth. So the Flying Bee was from his plane, or because he flew. And this is it still kind of looks like it did back there, if you can remember the original Blues picture. And this is what it looked like a few years ago. And they finally sold it, and they loved it, but they finally sold it because now the C-470 came in, and everything had changed. They were getting older. But this is what he said at the time: the best little cattle ranch in Colorado. Look at the great views that they had. And it had all those ponds on it. There's some spring-fed waters. Flying Bee is still there. You can still go to the place and look at it. So they sold then to Erickson in 2004. Erickson then started building Windcrest, but they conveyed just a small portion, a few acres, back to Highlands Ranch Metro in 2006. Metro still has named it Flying Bee, and they have stabilized the house because it was in bad shape. I'm not sure what they're going to do with it. They originally wanted to tear it down. Everybody seems to want to tear down these beautiful old homes. It's still there, but it hasn't been rehabbed yet. They've got a lot of different ways that they're thinking of going. But meanwhile, they've built a fishing pier. There's a pond. There's some picnic pavilions. And it's right there at the Highline Canal. We actually have about 7 miles of Highline Canal in Highlands Ranch, and it's right behind the house there, where that tree is over there, is the Highline Canal. Oops, my red thing. Well, anyway, it's behind there. And here's the Highline Canal. Here's C-470, and the corner down here. So the Highline Canal kind of goes along Santa Fe, and then kind of in and out here at Windcrest, and then it comes out down here at County Line, right there somewhere. So anyway, if you haven't walk down the Highline Canal in that area. You can park at Flying Bee, and an easy place to pick it up. It's kind of fun. So we have more history in our own backyard with the Highline Canal, but started in the late 1800s. And then we're going to spend the final part here mainly on the mansion. Since most of you, it seems like many of you have been to the mansion, we'll just kind of quickly go through some of the owners. Because that was the big land owner, and then all these smaller homesteads then as they sold, most of them sold to the mansion. Flying Bee did not. They sold to Erickson instead of selling to the mansion, because it wasn't like the same thing. It wasn't like just one owner by the time they sold. So here's an overview of the main owners: Samuel Allen Long, John Springer, William Hughes, Wade Phillips, Frank Kistler, and Lawrence Phipps. And then the modern day mansion owners are Marvin Davis owned it once Phipps died, and then they sold it to Mission Viejo, then to Shea Homes, and now HR Metro owns the mansion. So here's good old Samuel Allen Long. He owned it just for a short time, and he named it Rotherwood, and that was after his boyhood home in Pennsylvania. And Samuel Allen Long was very well known and respected he's considered a Denver pioneer. He's buried in Fairmont. He ended up being very wealthy, only then he had an accident with a cable car, and he ended up in the ladies' relief home where he died. And so after his accident with the cable car, he needed money, so he sold the mansion. But this is what the mansion looked like from the very beginning. Nobody realized this was the mansion. They knew about this picture, but they didn't realize that this is what the mansion had then morphed into. So it was just a simple stone farmhouse out on the plains of northern Douglas County. And the important thing here is see this window and this angle, because we'll be seeing that as we go along. So he started out just with like 160 acres or whatever, started buying property as they all did. And then he eventually had something like 2,000 acres. And he built this home here in 1891, and that plaque is still there. And they didn't realize it was his house until a few years ago, when Highlands Ranch Metro was rehabbing it, and they saw the name Rotherwood, and they associated Rotherwood with Samuel Allen Long, and then they went, oh my gosh, he was the first owner. So it was like a big revelation. It's kind of fun. And I did give you a handout so you have all of their names and the dates and all that. So after poor Samuel's intersection with the cable car, then he sold it, and he sold it to some realtors. They even had realtors back then. And then they eventually sold it. They were looking for a buyer, and that buyer was John Springer. John is a dandy. Isn't he a handsome man? This was, he bought it in 1897. He owned it till about 1913. He named it the Springer Cross Country Horse and Cattle Ranch. And then a few years later, he renamed it to Castle Isabel. I'll tell you why. John was very wealthy. He was a lawyer, very well known. All of these owners now also had interest in downtown Denver. So a lot of them just kind of use this as their country home or their periodic home or whatever. It's because Springer also had a home in downtown Denver. And he was very well known, very well respected. In fact, he even tried to run for governor against Speer. Mayor Speer. And Speer ended up winning. They think it was a rigged election. So that's why we have a Speer Boulevard instead of a Springer Boulevard, because he lost. And 5 days after he lost, unfortunately, he also lost his first wife, which was the reason they moved out here, Eliza. She had tuberculosis, so she died 5 days after he lost the election. So kind of a tough time for him. This is what he turned that little stone cabin into, or stone cottage into. Here's the original part, Samuel Allen Long. And then you see that Springer added the turret and the 2 stories there, the living room and the master bedrooms and all upstairs. And doesn't it kind of look like a castle? So remember, at first it was called Springer's Cross Country Horse and Cattle Ranch. And he was well known for his carriages. He was well dressed, he was well liked, respected. He grew these beautiful German Oldenburg horses. But then, now of course he's a widow. He's in downtown Denver, he's traveling around. He meets a lady named Isabel Patterson, makes her his wife. So Isabel Patterson becomes Isabel Springer. Her nickname was Sassy. Sassy. I'm going to name my next dog Sassy. She's a beauty. She was considered to be a very, very beautiful woman, and young. And Isabel didn't like being out in the country, stuck at that old house out there. She wanted to be in the city. So that was awfully nice of John. He rented a suite of rooms at the Brown Palace Hotel. Wasn't that good of him? Well, he's busy with all of, and he was involved in all kind of things. Isabel was involved in all kind of things too, not necessarily good. So she had more than one suitor. And what happened was her suitors got together at the Brown Palace. Henwood, the one with the hat there in the middle, he shot the other one, Von Fool. Is that a good name? He shot Von Fool. Von Fool dies. And he also shot someone else, just a bystander. And this all happened in the bar of the Brown Palace. So to this day, you can go to the Brown Palace and ask to see the bullet holes. Apparently, they're still there. And then Dick Kreck, who was a newsman for the Denver Post, I think it was, Rocky Mountain News, one of them, Post, he wrote a story called The Murder at the Brown Palace. So if you haven't read it, you should, because it's really a good story, but it's factual. It's based on fact. And the fact was he talks about, Sassy, and he talks about her lovers there, Henwood, and maybe Von Fool had also been out at the mansion when Springer's not there, of course. As part of the trial, they interviewed some of the staff, the servants at the mansion, and the servants even reported that she had male visitors when Springer wasn't there, and that at the mansion there was 2 bedrooms. There was his master and a her master, and only her master was used. His master, no one had slept in the bed, and they had to keep bringing alcohol up and all that kind of stuff. So she just apparently just had a good old time. And poor John knew nothing at all about it until all of this happened. And this was back in 1911, I think it was. That was a major scandal. And of course, he was a political figure, an attorney. He was on all these boards. So that was a major scandal back then. So he was disgraced. Poor Mr. Henwood went to prison, and he got out, and then he went back to prison, and he ended up dying in prison. So it was just a sad thing all around. They had the trial 5 days later. John divorces her and says, get out of Dodge. Gave her a little bit of money, sent her on her way. And she died just a few years later. She was only something like 36 when she died, and it was apparently of a heroin overdose. So just nothing but awful. So anyway, that's John Springer at the mansion. So John's father-in-law, his first wife was Eliza Hughes. So her father was Colonel William Hughes. So John sold the property then to the father, kind of keeping it in the family, but he wanted out, and he kind of disappeared from public life. So here's Colonel William Hughes. He owned the ranch for about 5-6 years. He renamed it Sunland Ranch. He was extremely wealthy. In fact, it was reported at the time that he was the second wealthiest man in Colorado, in the Denver area. He was only second to the Phipps family, who also ended up owning the mansion. And he was also involved in the development of Perry Park, so very well-known, very well-respected man. When he died, he bequeathed the house to his granddaughter, who was John Springer's daughter, Annie Clifton Springer Hughes, and she only had it for a couple years until she found a buyer for it. And so the buyer that she found was Waite Phillips. Have we heard of Phillips Petroleum? So he was the brother of the two brothers who started Phillips Petroleum. So another very wealthy family. So Waite Phillips, doesn't he look like a movie star there? Waite Phillips bought the ranch, and they used it kind of like a, periodic summer home and on and off and all that. And he renamed it Phillips Highland Ranch, no S, Highland Ranch. And that was named because he was into cattle. They're from like Oklahoma, and he had ranches all over the place in Oklahoma, in New Mexico, I think up in Wyoming. No, not in Wyoming. Mark's back there saying no. He had ranches all over the place. And he had it for about 6 years. This is what it looked like then. So we don't know if Hughes added to it or if Phillips added to it. They both had money. So at first we thought it was just Phillips, but now apparently we're thinking maybe it's Hughes. Anyway, the ranch, or the mansion, as you see, is now expanding. There's 3 levels, and there's a whole western wing now, not just the living room and the bedroom, but a whole western wing. And over here we see his initials, or Phillips Highland. This was his ranch then. That's what it looked like. And the entrance to the ranch was down at County Line and Broadway. So this is Phillips Highland Ranch sign. Notice there's no houses behind there. And here's his son, Elliot, or Chope. And Elliot is on a pony, and he's in the living room, and that's a real pony. You kind of can't see it because he's getting buried in the bear, but that's a real pony in the living room. And apparently the family loved the house, and they had very fond memories, and they visited often. So it was well loved. It was kind of like a gentleman's, or a very cozy ranch-style home. And Phillips then sold in 26. It was reported in 1925 he was worth $25 million. But he had a lot of other ranches, a lot of other things, so he sold. And he was a philanthropist. He had a lot of holdings in Oklahoma. So his house in Oklahoma, Philbrook, they donated it's a big house. And they donated, it's an art museum now. So that's some of the pictures of the front and the back and the side of Philbrook in Tulsa. And then they also had Philmont Ranch in New Mexico, and they donated that. Who do you think they donated it to? Boy Scouts. Yeah, so there's your black bull, and that's now the Boy Scouts. That was a big multi-thousand acre ranch. So they were big philanthropists. Next owner is Frank Kistler. He bought it then in 1926, and he owned it for a little over 10, 11 years. Good old Frank renamed it the Diamond K Ranch. And he also was very wealthy. He was in oil and gas, just like Phillips was. And so he made a big fortune in that. He also owned Wohlhurst stock farms. And here's some of the stuff that he was into: milking Shorthorns, Holsteins, Angus. And there's his brand, the Diamond K. There's what the solarium would have looked like during his time, the White Room. Beautiful. When Frank sold it during the Depression, and he was running into a little bit of financial difficulty, he didn't do all that badly, though, because he ended up going down to Glenwood Springs, and he bought the Hotel Colorado in the hot springs. So he did okay. He's buried down there. He sold it to Lawrence Phipps. Lawrence Phipps owned it. Notice how long, almost 40 years, 1938 to 1976. He died there. So he lived there by far the longest. He was a member, his father was Lawrence Phipps Sr., and very wealthy family. He had been a U.S. Senator. And there's Lawrence Phipps, and Lawrence Phipps had been involved with communications. He was one of the starters of the Mountain States Telephone Company, or Mountain States Bell. So his ranch brand was the Quarter Circle Bell. Is that cute? Quarter Circle Bell. Handsome fellow. And he loved writing. And he actually had, he and Kistler were neighbors. They had homes in downtown Denver. And so years before, he had convinced Kistler to let him resurrect the Hunt Club, and they started that then, resurrected that. It had been up at the Country Club in Denver. They started that down on Kistler's ranch, the Diamond K. And then, of course, when Phipps found out that the property was for sale, he snapped it up, and he had his Arapahoe Hunt Club, and it was there until he died. In fact, after he died. And here's the English hounds. That's what the men wore, the red, the women wore the black. And I think those hounds were imported from England. And remember, in England?
Yeah. Fred, that's George Beeman. That's Marvin's father in that picture.
Oh, George Beeman. Isn't that neat? George Beeman was the a veterinarian at the ranch for years and years. And so
he was the huntsman.
George was the huntsman.
Marvin was the veterinarian.
Yeah.
Got it. Yes.
Son.
His son. And That's not a very clear picture, but there they are. They're riding. What did they chase? Those were foxhounds. What did they chase? No. Coyotes, yes. Yeah. Yeah, even though they were officially English foxhounds, they chased coyotes out here in the West. And there, if you go to the mansion, as soon as you go in to the left where the volunteers sit, this is a big picture on the wall. And this was probably taken during the 40s or whatever, because one of the men over there has a, there he is. He has like a military uniform on. And I think this was Marvin, because he's a kid here, and I think that's George right there, Beeman. And anyway, so it was on the ranch for many, many years. When Phipps died, it eventually, and it's still going on today. It's still going on, and they're doing that out on the Eastern Plains.
10 minutes.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm including this only because, even though it's not in Highlands Ranch, it used to be. The Phipps property, by the time they bought it, it was like 22,000 acres. So it's a big ranch, only probably a little bit more. And they owned the property over by Chatfield, that is now Chatfield Dam. Only we had the flood in '65. And then, the Civil Corps of Engineers came in and they were going to build a dam. They did condemnation procedures, and so they took the property that the Phipps owned. This used to be their hay fields. Phipps didn't want to lose it because hay was valuable to their cattle, but they did. And if you go there today, you can read on an overlook over the dam, there's a sign and it says that they found mammoth bones when building the dam. So we officially have mammoths in what would have been Highlands Ranch, or it was Highlands Ranch. All right. And so Phipps had several children, and one of the children, Mary Young, they built this property, and this is right there off of the parking lot of the mansion today. And it used to be called the Chum Howe House. We have renamed it the Young Chum Howe House because the Youngs built it. So his daughter, Mary Young, and family built that house made out of double brick. This is Lawrence Phipps III. This was the son, and he then is the one who kind of took over after Phipps died in '76. And so he stayed on at the ranch for 2 or 3 years then and had some interactions with Mission Viejo. And he just died about 2 or 3 years ago. Then when Phipps died, then Lawrence, who you just saw, they sold the ranch and they found Marvin Davis. Marvin formed the Highland Ventures Corporation or a company, and he was just basically looking for an owner for it. He was kind of like the middleman. And Marvin Davis, of course, was a big man in town, very wealthy. He was also a big man in Hollywood. And so Marvin then found Mission Viejo, and Mission Viejo had an option. They wanted to make sure that they could build and get all the approvals and all that kind of stuff. But Mission Viejo then consummated, I think, the deal in '78. Meanwhile, they're, doing a lot of work. They're out of California. And it was during this time that Marvin here from California with Hollywood connections, Mission, everything's kind of, everyone's trying to work together. It was then that the Centennial miniseries was actually filmed, part of it was filmed at the mansion, so we're assuming it must have been some of Marvin's Hollywood connections. And that was a book by James Michener, and it was turned into a TV miniseries. So about an hour's worth of on the miniseries was, you can actually see the mansion. So if you haven't seen it for a while, rent it. The library has the whole, it's like a 12, it's like many, many hours long, 12 series. And I'm not going to show you the thing here because we don't have time, but here's just some pictures of the stars. There's Robert Conrad and Lynn Redgrave and Raymond Burr and all of those people. And notice the snow. Here they are filming in the living room. That's not a great picture, but here's the living room. There's Lynn Redgrave. Lynn Redgrave getting makeup. That was Timothy Dalton. And notice snow. They had to make the mansions make it snow. And so, what do you think the snow is? Well, it's not really snow. What do you think it is? Potato flakes. It's potato flakes. They had to push the potato flakes out and get it wet, and the next day it was a mess. And they had to, it was mashed potatoes. But doesn't that look like snow? And here's a picture, like, you know, she's looking out through the window. It looks so romantic. So Mission really worked that. They, in addition to allowing it to be filmed, they did a lot of PR around it because they were not well liked in the community. There was a lot of opposition to Mission Viejo. And remember in the James Michener book, it was called, the ranch was Veniford. So we now have a Veniford Street in Highlands Ranch, named after the filming that was there. This is a really great picture. This is when a Mission first learned about the property. They're up in an airplane. They're trying to decide if they're going to buy it. This is what the mansion looked like. Do you see any other homes anywhere? No. You know, I mean, it's basically the mansion and these few other little homesteads out in the bush. So I think that's really kind of a neat picture. So there's Mission. There's the two main guys. There was a lot of important people. The middle one here is Jim Teffer. He was known as the father of Highlands Ranch, and he was the main man who did the planning. He was a city planner, and when you look at it today, you've got Highlands Ranch Parkway, which is like 6 lanes. Back then, they did 6 lanes for various reasons. Phil Riley was the president, and they were both instrumental then in the early days of Highlands Ranch there. And they had all these development plans. There was initial reaction. Nobody wanted it. The state was urged to buy and control the growth. Controls are urged. Douglas official calls land project a worry. They're opposed to it. So they had a lot of opposition to overcome, but they did. These were the first homes in 81, and that was basically in Northridge, so kind of Broadway and Highlands Ranch Parkway, between Highlands Ranch Parkway and County Line, were the first few homes. Mortgage rate was only 12.5%. The property values were, homes were from the 70s, 90s, and low 100s. And here is the first family, Phil and Kay Scott. Here's their first home. It's still here today. And I hear that that home is going to go on the market pretty soon. So you've either got your choice of buying the Pretty Woman Ranch or the first home in Highlands Ranch if you want some history. See me on either one of them. I think that's what it sold for in 91. I think it's about 500 now. I haven't seen it on the inside. I don't know what it is, but it's about 500, 450 to 500. And if it's really nice, it could go higher. And it's still there. I just drove by the other day. Here's the second family that moved in, Gary, Jenny, and Carol Danny. Jenny, the one in the red, was the first baby born in Highlands Ranch. And there's their house. And they bought it then just a week later, and they bought for $106,000, and it would be about the same thing, 450, 500-ish. Yes, Jack.
Now the daddies were the second to buy it; they were the first to move in.
Yes, there's a lot of. They were the second to buy. The Dannies were employees of Mission, and I think the word was Mission didn't want one of their employees to be the first. So they made sure that it worked the other way around. Thank you, Jack. All right, and so here's just some of the early pictures and planning and all of that. Northridge was the first elementary school. Mission bought it, or Mission built it, gave the land. So they were very generous, and they did a lot of things that they had to do to get the job done. Here was the rec center when there was nothing else around. And here's the voice of Highlands Ranch, Art Cook. They did a lot of community events back then, and notice the beer. So we had Welty with beer, and here we have Mission with beer, because they were also, their parent company was Philip Morris, and they had beer and cigarettes, Marlboros, and all that kind of stuff. So aren't we a happy place? And then finally, to end here, we've got Shea Homes then, acquired Mission Viejo in 1997, so any unincorporated or any land that wasn't used. And then Metro District acquired the mansion from Shea Homes. It was deeded to the mansion, or to the Metro District, and that was in 2010. In 2010, Metro then took on a renovation of the mansion because it was in bad shape. And it's now beautiful, and if you haven't been there, you gotta go. It's amazing what $6 million can do. I would be happy with 10,000, but so they put in 6,000. So here's our mansion, or over the years, and here's what it looks like today. So it's a beautiful place today. And I think on that we are going to end, unless there's any questions.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.